making presentation and giving workshops. For those from PSU and local institution, let me congratulate on your work and sharing your knowledge. For our international guest speakers from other campuses, let me reiterate a warm welcome to accompany my thanks. As PSU takes pride in being the first and the leading nonprofit private universities in the kingdom, we are also pleased and honored that PSU is the first university in the region to host this first international symposium on applied linguistics research. These days, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is experiencing a dramatic and comprehensive transformation. Program reforms and innovative ideas make up the warp and weft of Saudi Vision 2030. The vision rests on three thematic pillars: a vibrant society, a thriving economy, and an ambitious nation. We have already seen the fruits of the delivery approach of the vision as we move from concept to reality. Some of the new deliverables can be felt and seen on the ground today. At PSU, our aim as an effective contributor to the Kingdom's Vision 2030 is to be at the forefront of higher education and applied research. We are highly committed to supporting research into language studies, particularly when it, when it has practical application to our society, which is the theme of our symposium today. Being a multicultural community with faculty and students, Prince Sultan University uses English as a lingua franca for daily communication. As Frank Schmitt said, that one language sets you in a corridor of life, while two languages open every door along the way. I applaud the College of Humanity for taking the initiative and teaming with leading researchers to orchestrate this timely symposium. This is yet another example of the many opportunities for practical discussion gatherings that have been and will be held at PSU. Last but not least, I would like to reiterate our special thanks to the distinguished speakers and partners who showed equal commitment to quality research. Sincere thanks are due to our plenary speakers, Professor Norbert Schmitt, Professor Janet Alteriba, and Professor Christina Gisaki. Special thanks are also due to our workshop partners, the British Council, the National Center of Assessment Qiyas, Zaka, the Artificial Intelligence Company, Tarajim, the Youth Translation Initiative, and the Saudi Association of Language Teachers. I would also like to thank all the speakers who join us, of course, from 15 countries to share their intensive research work today. And finally, I would like to acknowledge and thank the organizers of today's symposium, who devoted their time and talent in organizing and making this unique international symposium an overwhelming successful event. Dr. Hind Al-Ataibi, Committee Chair, Dr. Dina Dakhs, Committee Co-Chair, and thanks to all the logistics and support teams behind the scenes. Our appreciation also goes to the co-chairs of the Scientific Committee, Dr. Anna Sionova Shantoria, Victoria University of Wellington, and Dr. Suad Simbel, Al Qura University, who contributed to the success of the symposium. And we would also naturally like to feel that we have not only made friends with some of the leading experts in the field, but that this symposium will also mark the beginning of establishing the basis for long-term relationship with PSU. I hope that this one-day symposium will create a platform for thought leaders, academics, and researchers to share their ideas and views, which may in turn inspire new and practicable application in the field. In closing, I wish everyone a successful and fruitful symposium. Thank you all again, and I trust you will enjoy the rest of the program, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed Yamani, for that warm welcome. Our next speaker is Dr. Hind Al-Utaibi. Dr. Hind Al-Utaibi is the Dean of College of Humanities at Prince Sultan University. She has a PhD in education in computer-assisted language learning from the University of Manchester. Her research interests include ICT in education, distance learning, mobile-assisted learning, computer application in translation. Dr. Al-Utaibi is a member of several research learning centers and groups such as the IWAN and Tech Unity research groups at KSU University, the Applied Linguistic Lab at Prince Sultan University, and Digital Humanities. Dr. Al-Utaibi is currently working on developing several educational applications for language translation students. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Hind Al-Utaibi.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, Dr. Yamani, for your warm words, your opening speech. Thank you, Dr. Dina. Bismillah wa salatu salam ala Rasulillah. Good morning, all. It is my privilege and pleasure on behalf of the Applied Linguistics Research Lab, College of Humanities, Prince Sultan University, to welcome you all to the first International Symposium on Applied Linguistics Research. The initiative to organize an international event this international event comes in line with the Saudi Vision 2030, aiming at enhancing applied linguistics research in our country and in the Gulf region, which will contribute in promoting education and research opportunities. In light of the unprecedented events with the COVID-19, and after thoughtful discussions with the various committees, it was decided to move the symposium to a fully online virtual experience. We believe that such an agile decision will broaden the opportunities and engagement while maintaining the well-being of our audience. With the conference theme, Language Studies, Practical Implications for the Society, we are bringing together national and international perspectives through high-quality research in various areas of applied linguistics, including language learning and teaching, second language acquisition, assessment, translation, stylistics, corpus linguistics, discourse analysis, and psycholinguistics. This year, we are fortunate to have distinguished international plenary speakers with an impressive record in applied linguistics research. Professor Norbert Schmitt, University of Nottingham, Professor Janet Alteriba, University at Albany State University of New York, and Professor Christina Getzaki, Zayed University. We are also privileged to have outstanding workshop partners, the British Council, the National Center of Assessment Qiyas, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia Association for Language Teachers, Tarajim and Zaka. With carefully selected 32 paper presentations, 12 research posters, and 5 workshops, we hope to establish a platform for researchers in applied linguistics to share their experiences and recent work, and to promote national and international research collaborations. Finally, this exciting event would not have been possible without the support of Dr. Ahmed Yamani, PSU President, and the higher management, so thank you. My gratitude also goes to Dr. Dina Dakhs, the co-chair and the leader of the Applied Linguistics Research Lab, the scientific committees, the co-chairs, Dr. Anna Sayonova, Victoria University of Wellington, Dr. Suhad Sumbul, Al-Qura University, and all the members of the scientific committee, the organization committee, the IT and PR committee, for their outstanding efforts. Thank you all for participating in the first International Symposium on Applied Linguistics Research, and remember that the success of this event depends on you. Your active involvement and contribution to the discussions will be of vital importance. Thank you all, and I wish you an effective, productive, and stimulating event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hind. Thank you very much, Dr. Hind, for that introduction and welcoming. And finally, our third speaker, who is no stranger to most of us here. Dr. Dina El-Dux is an associate professor at the Linguistics Department in the College of Humanities at Prince Sultan University. She's also the research director for the college and the leader of the Language Learning and Teaching Research Group. Dr. Dina holds a PhD in English linguistics from Alexandria University in Egypt. She mainly teaches linguistics and academic and business writing courses. Her current research interests are second language acquisition, psycholinguistics, pragmatics, and discourse analysis. She has published in a number of flagship journals. Dr. Dina is very well known to the university, to the students and the staff alike. She has an open door policy and is very welcoming to all. She collaborates with researchers worldwide. Dr. Dina has worked tirelessly and is the engineer who put this amazing symposium together, amongst many others. Without further ado, it is my honor to welcome my friend and mentor, Dr. Dina El-Dux.
Thank you so much, Sophia, for this great introduction. Really appreciate it. Greetings to you all from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. On behalf of my colleagues at the Applied Linguistic Research Lab at the College of Humanities, Prince Sultan University, I'm sincerely grateful to all of you for being here today. We are truly grateful to Dr. Ahmed Yamani and to higher management of Prince Sultan University for the relentless support, to our college dean for her amazing cooperation, and for our distinguished plenary speakers and workshop partners for their outstanding contributions. We are also truly grateful to the international team of panelists who came from 10 different countries, to our speakers who are joining us from 15 different countries, and our participants who are coming from all over the world. I will promise them a memorable event. I would like to share a brief introduction about our research lab with all of you. The Applied Linguistic Research Lab, which is the organizer of this symposium, was established in September 2019. So we are 1 year old. We are a group of 15 investigators from different parts of the world who have gathered together with a passion for research in applied linguistics. Our work is interdisciplinary as it covers language learning and teaching, discourse analysis, pragmatics, sociolinguistics, psycholinguistics, vocabulary studies, corpus linguistics, and educational linguistics. As a group, we are committed to quality research and the creation of strong links between the research we do and the community we should serve. We therefore conduct quality research, hold research-related activities, offer training opportunities to interested budding researchers, and provide research-based consultation. We also welcome national and international collaboration, as we believe that collaboration is a true essence for outstanding and impactful research. Today's symposium is an excellent example of successful research collaboration. So let's maintain the excellence through ongoing discussions, regular exchange of knowledge, and continuous participation in collaborative research. The symposium today presents 3 plenary talks, 5 workshops, 32 paper presentations, and 12 poster presentations. The program is concurrently run over 6 virtual rooms, so you can choose the room you like, and or you can switch among rooms to follow the presentations you prefer. I also highly encourage you to complete the post-symposium evaluation form, which will be sent to you via email, so that we can improve our symposiums in the years to come. And now comes the moment that everybody in this room, I'm sure, is waiting for. The plenary talk of the one and only Professor Norbert Schmitt. And for that, I call on my dear colleague, Dr. Suhaid Sompol, the co-chair of the scientific committee and the former student of our distinguished plenary speaker, to introduce.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dina. Thank you so much, everyone. It gives me a great pleasure actually to be here with you today. We have worked so hard to reach this moment, and I'm sure, inshallah, it's going to be a great event. About Norbert, what can I say? he's not an ordinary supervisor. And if you have been under his wings in your PhD journey, you would know what I'm talking about. He's the kind of supervisor who gives you support not only when you are still a student, but also after you finish your PhD. He has been so supportive, and not only for me, but to all of his PhD students who are now working in different universities all over the world, from the United States in the West to New Zealand in the East. Actually, the co-chair of the scientific committee, Dr. Anna Sayanova, is also a former student of Norbert. So we are, I'm actually so proud to be one of his students. I can't pay him back. He has done so much to me. And if I'm speaking to you today, it's because of his support. So to say the least about Norbert, Norbert is emeritus professor at the University of Nottingham. He has worked in ESL and applied linguistics since he began his career in Japan in 1988. He has published 9 books on vocabulary and applied linguistics, and over 100 journal articles and book chapters. And it's actually my pleasure to say that I was a co-author in 3 of those. He specializes in second language vocabulary pedagogy and assessment. He has lectured and consulted widely on these topics at numerous international conferences and university talks. His current projects include compiling a list of the best-known vocabulary, co-developing the next generation of vocabulary tests, and researching the nature of vocabulary knowledge. Thank you so much, Norbert, for being here with us today. It's a great pleasure, really, to have you here with us. The floor is yours, but before you start, I would like just to remind everyone, please, that if you have any questions to Norbert, you can post your questions in the QA area. This will make it easier for me to read your questions at the end. Also, if you have any comments, any thoughts about the talk, please share your thoughts through the hashtag PSUALR2020 on Twitter. So Norbert, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Okay, let's get everything ready to go here. Okay, can you see my slide presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay, can you see me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so that means we're ready to go. Welcome, everybody. So I'm hoping we're going to have a really good conference here, and I hope that I can get things started off. So hello from the UK. It's just almost 7 o'clock, so a little bit early for me since I've retired. I don't normally get up this early, but I'm happy to do it so I can talk to you and talk to you about some of my favorite things. So talking about vocabulary, what kind of vocabulary it takes to use English, how much vocabulary, and how do we teach it. So as Suhad mentioned, I've been studying this for, well, since 1992 or so. So it's over 20 years, 25 years. So I've learned a lot. There's so much more to learn, and I'm really pleased that really bright young scholars like Suhad Sombul is taking up the new positions and doing a lot of research and moving the field on. Okay, so why don't we move on? Guess one way we can start is, okay, so I'm talking about teaching vocabulary. Almost all my research is in English, but why English? And maybe your students actually ask you this question as well. Why do we have to study English? Well, there's good reasons for it. Second languages are widely learned around the world. In fact, speaking only one language, like a lot of Americans, a lot of British people, that's the exception. Actually, around the world, most people speak more than one. Multilingualism is the norm. It's what happens in most of the world. And English is the most studied second language in the world. So as the rector quite rightly pointed out in his introduction, that English is the lingua franca. It's the common language, not only of universities, but all around the world. So it's not just English, it's just not my English, British English, whatever, it's global English. Everybody can benefit from it, and that includes our students. So there's a good reason for our students to learn language. Now, English wasn't always like that. back in the 1500s, it was just a small little language spoken by, on a small little island at the edge of Europe, only 4 million speakers. And it, you know, grew slowly, 1600, 6 million speakers. So it wasn't really until the British Empire, you know, 1900s that it really grew. And what kept it going was, okay, America took over from England as one of the major powers. And of course, language follows that. So English has been growing as a first language. So in 2008, how many people spoke it? Well, about 335 million speakers. So you're thinking, oh, that's quite a lot. And it is quite a lot. But is it really the main language that's spoken around the world? Well, there's English with 335 million. What about Chinese? A lot of people speak that. How about Spanish? A lot of people speak that. And in fact, if we look at the number of people speaking these languages as a first language, we see that in fact, English is number 3. So Chinese, of course, is the most widely spoken language with over 1 billion people. And actually Spanish has overtaken English as the second most spoken first language. But what makes English special is that English has by far the most second language speakers, perhaps as many as 1 billion. I mean, it's impossible to really measure, but there's, you know, just so many people speaking English. And you can look in Saudi Arabia, you know, almost everybody is learning English as a second language. So what makes English powerful and important for everyone, including your students, my students, is that, you know, it's the lingua franca. It's how we speak globally. That's how we can lead to international communication. English is the means to do that. So it's a good thing. But it's not just that. What about the importance of English in today's world? Maybe your students, you know, oh, I'm not interested in, you know, lingua franca, but if you want to do anything in the world internationally, English is so important. So let's look about books. So in a book that I was writing, I looked at some statistics about how English is used around the world. And one thing I looked at is, okay, of the books that are published around the world, how many are published in English? What percentage? So all the books all around the world that are published, what percentage do you think? So you got 4 numbers there. What do you think? And the answer is about 25%. So that's a lot. Of all the books in all the languages in all the countries of the world, about 25% are in English. That's a lot. What about the internet? Everybody's using the internet now. Okay, what percentage of the 10 million most visited internet websites are in English? Okay, now these are the most important websites, the ones that most people visit. And what's the percentage here? So you can look at the figures and yeah, it was over half. So in the internet, it's even more important if you want to access the most read, the most interesting sites, you know, you have to do it in English. And Russian and German were way, way in a distant second place, only 6%. So really, English is the language of the internet. What about tweets? If you're like tweeting, what about the languages and percentages? So we got English, Japanese, and Spanish. So just take a look. How would you match them up? And what we see is, yeah, about 1/3 were in English. When I looked this up, 16% Japanese and 12% Spanish. Cinema, movies. Okay, entertainment's really useful. People like going to movies. So I found 55 countries that had data about cinema watching. And in 40 of them, so that's about 73%, the top 7 most viewed films were in English. And in 21 countries, that was over 1/3. All of the top 10 films were in English. The top 10 films that were viewed in that country were in English. So of course we see the power of, you know, the media of Hollywood, but not just Hollywood, Bollywood. So Indian English is a major thing in cinema. Okay, world institutions. So you want to do things around the world, major institutions. So which of the following use English as an official language? It's not necessarily the only one, but as an official language. So the EU, yes or no? And of course, it's yes. The Olympics, Yeah. How about finance? The World Bank? Yes, English is an official language. United Nations, of course. Aviation. So I'm a pilot. Pilots fly around the world. We have to have some common language. What language is it? It's English. And same thing for shipping. Shipping goes all around the world on the world's oceans. You need to have some language, and it's English. So for all these institutions, English is a language that you can communicate globally in. Okay, this is an academic conference, and some or many of you might want to publish the results of your research. I hope that you do. But if you're going to do that, where's the place, or how are you going to do that? Well, Scopus is a database of academic publications. And what percentage of the journals listed in Scopus were in English? So you could start here at 0, 25%, 50%, 75, 100%. Where do you think that is? Well, when I calculated, it was about 80% of the journals were in English. So the thing is, if you want to publish your research, and I hope you do, and you want to do it in a way where lots of people will read it internationally, you virtually have to do it in English now. Okay, it's not right, it's not wrong, it's just the way it is. English is the international academic language. And what about testing? So we have huge numbers of English language learners around the world. And just as an illustration, people are taking, our learners, our students are taking tests of English proficiency every year. So with the IELTS, so by which is the test by one of your sponsors, the British, which were the latest figures that I could find, how many people took the IELTS test? Okay, and you can see, the numbers there. And the answer is, it was 2 million people, 2 million learners in more than 130 countries. So, I mean, that's a massive number of people. And that's just the IELTS, which is mainly for British English. The American equivalent, the TOEFL exam, had a similar number of learners. And then there's other tests as well, like the Trinity test. So the punchline here is that, there's just millions of people studying English as a second language. It's a major industry, and it's a major factor in the world. So what are the punchlines? So second languages are essential for communication in a wider context. Language teaching is a booming business, both in teaching, pedagogy, and research. And of all the second languages, and all second languages are good. Arabic is a major second language around the world as well. But English is probably the most important and useful, simply because it, for all those reasons I showed you, global English is a way for international communication. So there's good reasons why we're talking about English in this. This is an applied linguistics symposium, but there's going to be a lot talking about English as a second language. Okay, so that's why we should be studying English. Let's go and move to the second part of our talk. How much vocabulary is needed to use English? Okay, so that's a really good question. If we're going to have pedagogy, how much do we need for listening, or for reading, or for speaking, or for writing? Okay, for speaking and writing, it's really hard to tell, because some students might have a smaller vocabulary, but they can use that vocabulary really well, and maybe they can be effective. Other people may know lots and lots of words, but just to a very small level, and they can't use them correctly. So that really depends a lot on learner strategies, how well they can use the vocabulary they've got. So I'm going to talk about listening and reading, because for those, your learners have to be able to process the language that are coming into the ears, or the language on the page. And we can actually measure and quantify how much vocabulary that is. Okay, so let's start with reading, because that's where most of the research is. So I'm doing some research with Gardner and Davies from the Brigham Young University. So Mark Davies is the person who runs the COCA corpus, and anybody who's not familiar with that should look at it, because it's a fabulous resource. It's free. Of course, we like free. All you have to do is sign up to use it. I'm doing some research with them, and here's what we've come up with. So what we've done here is we thought how many words might a second language learner come across in a year? And we thought, so some learners read a lot, some learners read not very much, just maybe are only exposed to the language in their classroom. But we thought maybe 300,000 words. Now, how many different words does it take to be able to read passages with that amount of words? And so we did some calculations, and what we got here are two coverage figures. So coverage means the percentage of words that your learners know in the text. And the research shows that you need to know quite a lot. So of course, you don't need to know every word. All of us run across, even if we're very proficient readers, will come across a word we don't know, but that doesn't mean that we can't understand everything. So a few unknown words isn't a problem. That's the norm. But the research shows that if you don't know about 95% or 98%, then the comprehension gets less because you're just coming across words, important words that you don't know the meaning of. Okay, so 95 or 98, that's the range that we're thinking. 100% is the best, yeah? It's always the best. There's always some words that you don't know. So 95 to 98% is a range that reading is possible where there's a few unknown words, but it doesn't bother you that much. So for 95%, we can see that the type of reading makes a difference. So adult fiction, we calculated that you need to have a vocabulary size of 5,800 lemmas. So a lemma is a word with its grammatical inflections like walk, walks, walking, walked. And the reason we chose that is because most students, most of the time, if they understand walk, they can understand walked. Okay, that's just the past form, or walking, that's the present form. Okay, walkable, that's a lot trickier because students quite often don't understand those derivatives. So lemmas are just the root form plus the grammatical inflections. So how many lemmas? Adult fiction, 5,800. Juvenile fiction, so that's teenage fiction, that's less. News, that's more, 6,800. Magazines, 8,200. Academic, 5,200. And you're probably wondering, why are the news and the magazines higher? Well, I think that's just because there's so many different topics. In a newspaper, you're going to have all different kinds of news about all different kinds of things. So you're going to have a wider variety of topics. Same things in magazines. Okay. Academic texts, yes, there's going to be wider topics, but the kind of language used is much more similar. So for 95%, those are the kind of targets. That's how big your learner's vocabulary need to be, that range of words in order to understand. Now you go up to 98% so that you know more words, and you'll be able to read easier and get more comprehension, but it means that you also need to have bigger vocabulary sizes. So with adult fiction, it's like 11,000, juvenile fiction, 86, newspapers, almost 12,000, magazines, 14,000. So what you can see is the difference between 95 and 98%, it's a lot. You would think, oh, only 3% is not different. But if you think about it, 95% is one unknown word in 20. 98% is one unknown word in 50. And if you look at it that way, yeah, it makes a big difference. So the point here is you don't have to memorize all these numbers, but the point here is that, your learners have to know a lot of vocabulary in order to be able to read well. It's not something you can teach 1,000 words or 2,000 words and expect them to read in English. And that's one of the big problems. Like, so at the University of Nottingham, we have international students come in and they can speak just fine, but they have a real struggle to be able to read all these texts that we're giving them because their vocabulary sizes are too low, quite often right around 5,000. Well, that might just about get them through with 95% coverage, but that means there's a lot of words they don't know. To get them up to 98% where they could read easier, they need to have a lot higher vocabulary sizes. Okay, so that's for reading. What about for listening? And what would you think? Would you need more vocabulary for listening or more for reading? And if we look at the figures, I think it's pretty clear that for listening, you need a lot less. And the reason for that is spoken discourse is a lot less dense. It's spoken discourse, particularly say conversation, we talk about the same things again. We talk about the weather, we talk about your friends, we talk about the parties we're going to. There's fewer topics, you know, we don't go into them in depth. So you just need less vocabulary. So 1,500 maybe for 95%. Now that's just for everyday topics. That's not talking about everything, but that's just chat. If you're going to, you know, listen to the radio, there's going to be a lot more topics, talk shows, watching TV, you're going to need more. And you get up to the 98%. You know, what we're talking about is probably somewhere, you know, 5,000 plus, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000. So we're in that kind of range if you want to have good coverage to be able to listen to a wide range. But you can listen, particularly to just everyday conversations. And that's probably the first step that your students want to get to, where they can just, you know, talk to their friends in English. And for that, you know, a 3,000 word, a 3,000 lemma target is a good target. But of course, you know, your students will probably want to do more than that. And then their vocabulary sizes have to be higher. So those are just some ideas about how much vocabulary it takes to be able to operate in English. And you're probably wondering, yeah, Norbert, where do these come from? Did you just pull these numbers out of a hat, like a magician pulling the rabbit out of the hat? And no, we get them from research. And for research, if you're going to understand the vocabulary size, you need to have two bits of information. So you need to know how much coverage is required. So do you need 90%, 95%, 98%? So what percentage of words you need to know in the text or the listening? And then what percentage can you take out of the text? So the reading comprehension. Okay, so coverage comprehension. So let's see how this works. So this is what we do. So here is a reading passage that I took from a magazine. And what I did was I took out 5% of the words. So I'm assuming that you know the rest of the words. So I took out the 5% least, the lowest frequency, the least known words. And what you see is that it's not nice and even. You know, sometimes there's big passage bits of the text where you know all the words, and then you get to places where there's a lot of words that you don't know right in a row. And it's just, you know, that's the way it works. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking for a minute or so and just let you read this passage. And when you're reading it, think about, okay, can I get the overall comprehension? Can I get the gist of the message? Then ask, can I get most of the detail? And then the last question is, you know, would I be happy to read this kind of text with this many holes in it, this many unknown words? Or is it really just too hard? Because you're only going to do this one paragraph. But would you be able to do this for an hour or two, which is what, you know, students would have to do with their study. Okay, so just have a quick look and get a feeling about your comprehension. Okay, so hopefully most of you have had a chance to, you know, get a feeling for what it feels like and how does it feel to you? Is this the kind of thing you'd be comfortable reading over a long period of time? And our question is, you know, are there enough words there around the blanks that you could guess what the words are? So here's what the words were. Okay, could you have guessed those words? Or at least could you have guessed, you know, the general meaning, even if you didn't know the exact words? And of course, it's not just comprehension, but the more words you know, the better chance you have of guessing the unknown words in a text. Okay. So that was 95%, go back, which is one unknown word in 20. Let's see what 98% looks like. So here's the same thing, it's 98%, but in this case, it's one unknown word in 50. And you can see there's a lot, the passage is about the same size, but there's a lot fewer blanks. So the same thing, just have a read of this and see, you know, does that 3% additional coverage make much difference, or does it make not much difference at all? So I'll just let you read this now and I'll be quiet for a minute. Okay, so again, I hope you had a chance to look at it. And when I do this with people all around the world, everyone says that 98% is a lot easier. Not only just to read, but also to, guess the unknown words, because there's just so many more words around it, so much more context around them that you can guess them easier. Okay, so that's where we get these figures from. We give this to lots of people, and what they say is that 95%, I'll just go back to that. 95% is like, most people say that, okay, we can get the general understanding, the general gist. So 95% is enough for that. Can we get all the details? No. But can we get a lot of the details? Yes. But when I ask them, would you like to read like this for an hour or two? And they're going like, no way. It's too hard. There's too many unknown words. So what we take from that is 95% is the lowest percentage. Yes, at 90%, you can still understand, but it just gets too hard and people just don't want to do it. So from this kind of research, we find that 95% is probably the lowest coverage that we want. Other than that, it's just too hard to work. When we go to 98%, it's like, okay, this is a lot easier. I can cope with this. I still have to guess some unknown words, but I can get almost all the gist. I can get most of the detail. And okay, this reading is something I can do. Now, 100%, 99% is better. 100% coverage is better. But at 98%, I can do it. And there's actually some new words I can learn as well. So that's where we get 95 and 98%. Okay, so I hope that you can understand now where this research, how the research works, and that the numbers make sense for you. So 98, 95%, they're not just numbers that Norbert threw out, but you actually understand what they mean and why they are important for your students. Now, the relationship between vocabulary coverage, where we see at the bottom, and the reading comprehension on the vertical axis here. Okay, what's the relationship between it? Now, it could just be a straight line where the more coverage you have, the higher coverage, the more comprehension. It could be something like this where, well, as the coverage goes higher, you're not really getting much value until you reach this point, and then all of a sudden there's enough vocabulary known that your comprehension really goes higher. So that might be some kind of threshold idea. Or it might be the kind of curve we see a lot in science, this S curve, where you don't get much benefit, then you get a lot, and then it tapers off. And this is what I actually thought when I was doing, before I did this research. But when I did it with some colleagues, some reading colleagues, so with Bill Grabe and Xiaoying Zhang from Northern Arizona University, what we found was this. Okay, so let me show you how to do this. So the one in the middle is the mean, the average. So that's one we're going to look at. And what we found was at 90%, so that means 1 word in 10 you don't know, yeah, you still can get comprehension, but the learners were only able to get about 50% of the information from the text. Okay, that's still a lot. If you don't know 1 in 10 words, you can still understand a lot. You can still understand 50%. But I think almost all of us would like our students to get more than 50% of the information from a text, right? To understand more than 50%. If we go all the way to the other end here, 100%, and you'd think, oh, if you know all the words in a passage, you should have all the meaning. But we only got about 75% of the comprehension. You're going, why is that? If you know all the words, you should be able to get all the meaning. But reading is not just vocabulary, is it? You have reading ability, your reading speed, your background knowledge. So reading is not just vocabulary, but we can see from this just one thing. Vocabulary by itself can explain 75% of the comprehension in reading. So clearly vocabulary is probably the most important aspect in reading, but it's not the only one. So vocabulary by itself can't do everything, but it can do a lot, yeah? So, and if we look at 95% to 98%, the figures I've been looking at, we're getting kind of between 60 and 70% comprehension. Now, of course, more is better, but even with 100% coverage, you're not going to get more than 75. unless you have other reading abilities, unless you have good reading skills in addition to vocabulary. So vocabulary just by itself really explains so much about reading comprehension, how much information your learners can get out of a text. Vocabulary explains so much, and it just goes again to show that vocabulary is such an important aspect to be able to use English, because English, Arabic, every language, it's about meaning, right? We want to express meaning. That's why we use language. And what is the meaning? Well, there's some meaning in grammar. There's some meaning in your pronunciation, the way you inflect words, your stress. But most of the meaning in language is in words. And so it just makes sense. If you want to have language be communicative, if you want to have language be meaningful, you have to have it. You have to have the vocabulary for it. Okay, if we go to listening, now this is a similar kind of graph, but it's just backwards. So I did this with one of my PhD students, Hilda van Zeeland, and we took listening passages from the internet. Okay, and here we have 100% where the students knew all the words, and they knew we only had 10 comprehension questions, but they more or less, both natives and non-natives, could answer all 10 questions. They had good comprehension. 98% it went down to about 9 out of 10 questions, and for 95 and 90 it went to about 8 out of 10. So you think, oh, no difference between 95 and 90, but look at this big range here. And what we found was that, some of the students could do it and some couldn't at 90%. There was a big range there. But with 95%, a lot more students could do it. And, everybody got at least 6 out of 10. So what we said was for listening comprehension, 95% is probably your minimum. 90% is too low. So listening, 95%, these numbers coming up again and again. It's just like 95, 98, that's sort of the sweet spot. 100% is best, of course, but it's hard to get that with students because there's always a few words they won't know. Okay, so what's the punchlines here? English is important to operate in a global world. It takes a lot of vocabulary to use English. Much of the vocabulary is not just picked up as if by magic. Okay, so I hope I've convinced you that, your students need to know a lot of vocabulary to be able to operate well in English, but they're not just going to pick it up in classrooms unless it's focused on. We actually have to have a focus on teaching vocabulary. So we need to teach vocabulary in a sustained and principled manner. We can't just leave it to chance. So that brings me to the last and biggest part of the talk, and maybe the talk that's most interesting for what I assume is the audience that I'm talking to. Most of you out there are English teachers at some level, whether it's primary, secondary, university. So what are some of the principles for teaching English as a second language? Well, there's so many. I could talk for like whole semesters, and I have when I teach my teaching English class at the University of Nottingham. But I've only got a little over half an hour or so. So I'll take a few principles here. Some of you may have seen the English Teaching Professional. So this is a teacher's news magazine, small journal, and myself and some of my PhD students wrote a series of articles, little short articles in it for teaching English. And I wrote the first one, which was sort of the introduction. And Suhat Sombu, one of my PhD students, she's got an article in that series as well, which was really nice. But in my introduction, I picked out 6 ideas that I thought were, really important. There's a lot of others that are important as well, but I think these 6 ideas are good to sort of lay a foundation for what good vocabulary teaching is like. Okay, so I'm going to go down all of these in detail. So I've already talked about a lot of vocabulary is necessary to function in English, and hopefully I've convinced you of that. So let's go on to some of the teaching. So learning vocabulary is more than just form and meaning. Vocabulary learning is incremental in nature. Recycling is important. There's a role for both explicit and incidental learning, and vocabulary is more than just individual words. Okay, so let's move on. So the first one, knowing a word. what is meant by knowing a word? You know, oh, I know, your student says, oh, I know that word. What does that mean? So there's so many things that, you know, we need to know about words to use them well. So, I mean, most of the time, this is where we start. We have to know the meaning, of course, and then we need to have some idea of the form. How is it spelled so we can read it or we can write it? And how does it sound so we can listen to it or we can pronounce it? But that's not everything. We need to know the grammatical behavior of it. Is it noun? Is it a verb? You know, is it a common word? The frequency, connotation, does it have any extra meanings? Is it formal? Collocations, you know, what words does it go with? What are the derivatives? So the point here is there's a lot to know about a word. So I said that the learning starts with the meaning and these links with the form, the spelling or the pronunciation. And let's just look at that. And quite often when I talk to teachers, like, what does it mean to know a word? They say, oh, I teach the meaning. Well, the thing is, for most of the words, your students already know the meaning. They know the meaning from the first language. What they don't know is the form in the second language. They don't know the spelling or the pronunciation of the English word. They know the meaning in Arabic just fine, or Spanish, or, you know, Russian, or whatever their first language is. They know the meaning, they just don't know the form. And these are really, really common problems with, you know, not just with Arabic learners, but with all learners around the world. So, you know, look at these errors. The flag is the nation symbol. I get a lot of joy from listening to music. When I heard the good news, she smiled happy. Are these the kind of errors that you find in your students? And the answer, I think, is probably yes. So these are the words they needed. So they knew the meaning. They knew that, you know, nation, national, they had the meaning. They just didn't know the derivative form that's correct and appropriate in that context. They knew enjoy, but maybe they didn't know the noun form enjoyment. Okay, so the word form may be more difficult than the meaning. And I did some research with my colleague Cheryl Zimmerman in California, and we gave this test. So we said, okay, here's the word persist, but can you put it in the noun, verb, adjective, and adverb form? So we wrote sentences here that, you know, forced a certain derivative form. So the judge changed his mind because the lawyer's blank. Well, it can only be one word. So it's not persist, it's got to be persistence. The lawyer persisted. And so if we see this, so the word is the same, it's just for different noun verb forms. It's the different word family members. And so again, that's really like derivatives and forms. And what we found was that, so when we looked at Nottingham and California university students, so these are university students. So, you know, they were pretty advanced, but even though they typically knew 2 out of those forms, or, you know, the master's students knew 3 out of the 4 forms. Okay, so, but they typically didn't know all of them. And if they knew 2, it was normally the noun of the verb form. So the punchline here is that, you know, word form is difficult. It's not always easy. Okay, so word form, you know, that's difficult. It takes a while to learn that. So collocations. So I think maybe most of you have heard this idea, but let's just see for those who, you know, it's a new idea. So there's ways we say things in English. Okay, so what time is it here? It's 7:30 in Nottingham. Okay, so I'm kind of sleepy. You know, I don't normally get up this early. So what do I need? I want to say that, you know, what I really need is a coffee that's really got some caffeine punch. That's what I need right now. Okay, how do we say that in English? Powerful coffee? Makes sense. You know, the meaning should be okay, but we don't say that. I want a strong coffee. Yeah, that's what we'd say. How about a heavy coffee? Makes sense, doesn't it? But we just don't say that. So collocation is just the idea that words have partners. There's certain ways we say things. It may be nothing to do with logic. It's just the way things are. It's the way language developed. Now we have the same thing, powerful, strong, and heavy. What about rain? It's like I'm here in England. It rains a lot. Sometimes the rain really comes down. What do we say when the rain really comes down? So much water. Do we say powerful rain? Makes sense, doesn't it? But we just don't say that. Strong rain, we don't really say it too much. I got a question mark because, you know, maybe a few people say it, but what we say is heavy rain. That's the norm. That's what people expect. That's what people can understand most easily. So collocations are the idea that, you know, it's not part of the meaning of the word comes from the words around it and word partners. And so collocations are something that your learners need to be able to know in order to use English well. Now, if they said powerful coffee, people could understand, but they'd say, you're still learning English. You know, that's not quite right. I can understand your meaning, but, you know, it's just not quite right. So collocations are really important if you really want to have higher level and appropriate English. Okay, so learning a word requires a lot more than just learning the form and the meaning. The form and meaning is the start, and that's where we start. And we're not, you know, if our students learn like powerful rain to start with, like, okay, that's a start. That's not a bad thing. That's, you know, a good thing where you start, you know, thinking which words can go together. But you need to know more than that. You need to know these contextual kinds of word knowledge as well. Okay, so which words go together? Which words collocate? Or if I need a noun form, as for, I know persist, but I need the noun form, I need to know persistence. So those contextual kind of word knowledge, you know, you need to know those as well. Words are not just in isolation. Now, a lot of those are more difficult to learn explicitly, like collocations. It's really hard. You can study some, but you're never going to learn all of them. You just have to get intuitions. You need to build a feeling of which words fit together. And where does it come from? It comes from seeing lots and lots of English, hearing it, reading it, speaking it. So you need a lot of exposure to get some of these kinds of word knowledge. So what we need is explicit learning. We need to teach learning, probably like the form and the meaning to start with. But then your students also need a lot of exposure. They need to come across these words again and again in their listening and their reading in order to build these other kinds of word knowledge. So you need both the explicit teaching, but also the incidental learning from exposure. Okay. My next point is that vocabulary learning is incremental. It's like you just, you know, so many times, you know, your students like, okay, they don't know the word, they study it on a word list, and that's fine. And now, okay, I know the meaning for the form, they know the word. Vocabulary learning is not like that. It's not just learn, not learn. It's not black and white. So I think they're all these word knowledge components I told you about, they're learned according to a continuum, not just yes, no, but gradual learning, gradual mastery. How might that work with something like spelling? Well, it might be something like, oh, I can't spell the word at all. So the word really is a tricky word in English. It's got double letters. The vowel is not so straightforward. So maybe it starts out, oh, I can't spell it all. And maybe I know some letters. And typically, if you learn a few letters, you'll typically learn the letters at the beginning. It's the most obvious, it's the most salient. Maybe the word letters at the end. Then maybe you get phonologically correct, L-E-E-L-Y. You know, so if our students at the beginning spell it that way, it's like, that's not a bad thing. That's actually learning, some of the letters, you know, they can get the pronunciation, but, you know, it's not fully correct where it's R-E-A-L-L-Y. Okay, so even spelling is not just like, I don't know the spelling or I do know the spelling, you know, it's a progression. We could see that with derivative forms. So you got the word nation. Well, maybe that's all they know at the beginning. Okay, and that's good. All learning is good. That's a start. And then maybe they learn, national, that's the adjective form. Okay, that's good. That's additional knowledge. So you're learning more. That's good. But it might take them a long time before they learn all the different possibilities. And in fact, you know, even native speakers may not learn all the different possibilities because there's so many possibilities for nation. You know, I haven't got anything here about international. Okay, that's another set of words. Okay, so the point here is that, you know, derivative forms, spelling, probably all aspects of word knowledge, they're learned over time and it's incremental. So I just made up this little graph here. So this isn't from research, it's not from data, but it's just my impression. So you got like you know, some of the types of word knowledge, the spoken form of the word, the written form, the meaning, how does it work in grammar, what's the collocation. Register is sort of like, you know, the connotation, the feeling, is it frequent, what other words, association, what other words does it make you think of. So when you see the word just a few times, probably, you know, most of these, you'll just have very kind of limited amounts of knowledge. You know, you're just learning the word. So maybe the spoken form and the written form, you start getting some mastery, you might understand the meaning a bit, but maybe, you know, the contextual kind of knowledge down at the bottom, you don't really know very much. Okay, over time, you see and use the word a few more times, and maybe, you know, it's something like this. Maybe the spoken form and the written form, maybe you're pretty comfortable with that. The meaning, maybe, you know one or two meanings, but a lot of words in English are polysemous. So there's probably a lot of meanings you don't know yet. So you can still learn there the grammatical form, maybe you understand that a bit better. You start getting some intuitions of collocation. And, you know, over time, when you see the word a lot more, then maybe these will like move over to the right side where you have more mastery. But there's almost always more to learn. So I haven't got like all these, you know, at a full 100% knowledge. So again, this is just something I made up, but I think it's just an illustration. This is the way that I think that, you know, learning happens. You know, it's like you learn little bits here, and then the different kind of word knowledges, they're not just all going over just, you know, in the same speed. You're learning some faster than others. And I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? It's like maybe a person can spell the word, but they don't know all the derivatives. Okay, so that shows that all the types of word knowledge don't operate just at the same speed of learning. Okay, so vocabulary learning is incremental, and you know, we need to have explicit learning and explicit learning and extensive exposure. And probably at the beginning, the explicit learning really can get you to a good quick start, but we need that extensive exposure at the end to give lots and lots of context, to see the words in different, you know, context of different situations, so that you can build all those other kinds of knowledge. Okay, recycling. Recycling is really important as well. Okay, words need to be recycled. So recycled just means reviewed, seen again, used again. And it's really important because, of course, you've got to consolidate what you've learned, right? So if you're like me and you get a bit older, you forget most of everything. Okay, well, that happened to me even when I was young. But okay, you know, everybody forgets. It's the human condition, okay? So if you don't review, if you don't like, you know, revise and look at things again, you'll forget it. That's just the way human brain works. Okay, but it's not just holding on to what you know. I think recycling is really important because it's adding to what you know. So when I showed those graphs where the learning went from, you know, less learning to more learning, greater mastery, okay, that's moving up the developmental scale, learning more about the word. So the revising is not just to keep what you've got, but to add to what you've got and to master the different kinds of word knowledge. Maybe at the beginning, you'll just focus on form and meaning, and that's fine. But as you get more exposure, you use the word more, maybe you start learning more about collocations or about the derivatives, or get intuitions about how common the word is. Do I use it a lot? Is it really frequent or not? And when you look at this, you know, it seems to me that the consolidation, sort of the memory, remembering what you got is part of it. But I think it's actually more important that the recycling helps you to advance your knowledge of the words, to add to it, to learn more about the words, be able to use them in more different contexts and situations. So the enhancement, I think, is actually more important than the consolidation, or at least as important. So recycling is as much about it as enhancement as it is consolidation. So I think that's a really good punchline. Why do we have to review words? Well, it's not just because we're going over old words to remember them. We're trying to learn them better because it takes time to learn words well. Okay, but consolidation is important because we do forget words. So that brings us to, you know, how are words remembered? How, well, this isn't just word, this is everything. Okay, How does the mind forget? Is it the kind of thing like A, where, okay, as time goes on, you just forget stuff, you know? Or is it the kind of thing like B, you remember it, but then at some point, you start forgetting? Or is it like C, where you start forgetting pretty soon and then it sort of like tapers off? So, you know, this has big implications for how we teach. When should we recycle? When do we revise? And what do you think it is, A, B, or C? And the answer is, well, it's C. The human condition is that the mind forgets most of the stuff straight away. And you can sort of think why that is, because if we remembered everything, you know, that we ever, you know, that we see every minute of the day, every sign, every message, your mind would just become overloaded so soon. So the mind basically protects itself to be able to understand and process new information by forgetting most of the stuff that, you know, it decides it's probably not so important. It just basically forgets it. So there's forgetting very early on, and, you know, it comes very soon and then it tapers off. So where should we revise? Is it okay to revise, you know, later on? And the answer is, well, if we do, everything's already forgotten. So what we need to do is have some revisions soon after the learning session. Really, so like after you teach, it'd be best if your students went to, you know, the cafe and sat around and chatted and say, what did we learn in class today? Like having that quick revisions very soon, that would be the most effective. Okay, but, you know, we also find that, you know, if you've got 10 minutes to revise, instead of just doing it like in one session, like all massed together, it'd be better to revise 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes at different times rather than like 10 minutes all in one time. So having the revision like spread over time is efficient, and probably the most efficient way, or one way of doing it that's been suggested, is this idea of expanding rehearsal. So having a revision session soon after the study session, that's really useful. You know, it just sets things in your mind and allows you to remember it longer, maybe 24 hours later, a day later, a week later, a month later. And you can see these are expanding. And the reason for that is, okay, so the first time you learn and you start forgetting straight away, fine. So if you have a revision pretty soon afterwards, that tops you back up to 100%. But now you've had 2 learning sessions, right? So you know the information better. So that means that the forgetting will be slower so that your next revision can be longer, right? And you have that revision and then you top it up to 100% again. And now you know it better because you looked at it 3 times. So the forgetting will be slower. So the next revision after that can be longer. So you can see how the revisions expanding can be just as effective. You don't need to do it like, you know, today, tomorrow, the next day. You can actually spread out the revision. So the point, you know, so you can revise any way, but this is just one way that you could do it the most effectively. Okay, but whatever, you need to have the revision. Okay. And that's no brainstorm. All of you knew that already before, but I'm just giving you some research background to like show, you know, give you, you know, validation of what you already knew. You know, your students have to revise if they're going to remember. Okay, let's look at explicit learning versus extensive exposure. I talked about this before, you know, but I get asked all the time, which is better? And I think that's the wrong question. I think the right question is, okay, they're both really useful, but they have strengths and weaknesses. So explicit study, so it leads to learning that's typically faster. If you explicitly study, you learn faster, the learning is stronger and it's more durable, it lasts longer. Okay, so there's lots of advantages to explicit study. The problem is, in a classroom, we need to know so much vocabulary that we can't teach it all. You know, if we were able to teach all the words, you know, that would be the most effective way, but we can't. So extensive exposure has its advantages. So the thing is, if your students are reading and listening a lot, okay, they may not be any particular words, but those words will come up. So it provides the repetition. And if your students have studied the words explicitly to start with, they'll probably have that form meaning link where the form and the meaning are together. They see, you know, the form and the reading, they understand the meaning. Okay, so they can understand that word, and then that extensive exposure from reading, for example, gives the repetitions. So we need that recycling, right? So the extensive exposure gives the repetition, but it also gives information about those contextual kinds of word knowledge. Remember, I was talking about collocations. It's really hard to teach collocations explicitly because there's so many of them. We can teach some of them, but we're never going to teach all of them. So for some of these kinds of word knowledge that really are like contextualized, they're quite difficult to teach. So where do we get it from? We need it from that explicit, no, we need it from that incidental learning, that massive exposure. Students need lots and lots of exposure to a language in order to use it well. And it's not like one is better than the other. They do different things. Okay. And let's just, have a look at like how this might work. So spelling is something that can be taught explicitly. So here's your next quiz. Grieve or grieve, A or B? Oops. A or B, receive or receive. So this is a common error. It's like I had real problems with this when I was a kid. And those are the answers. And I learned this explicit rule, I before E except after C. So probably all of you have learned that as well. So it's an explicit rule that we can help to remember, is it I before E? Okay, so that's explicit and that can be useful. But spelling is not just learned explicitly. A lot of the spelling and the information about your spelling is learned from exposure. So let me illustrate this. So here are 8 words. I took 8 words that are really, really uncommon. You've never seen these before, I think. I never did. But since I'm a tricky professor, there are 4, I've got 8 words. 4 of these are real words and 4 of them are fakes that I made up. Question is, can you tell which ones are real and which ones are fake? You've never seen any of these before. Okay, so isozyme. Okay, oops, isozyme. Is that a real word or a fake word? What do you think? Okay, it's a real word. It's the enzyme in milk. Petardine. Is that a real word or a fake? It's a fake, and why is it a fake? Well, you probably saw it. It's just like, okay, it doesn't look right. PT at the beginning of the word, that's not in English. Okay, nobody taught you that, but you got intuitions about it, right? Okay, prolificity, real word, fake? Okay, it's prolific power or characterization. Charo, is that real or fake? Okay, it's fake. TCH, that's legal in English, but not at the beginning of the word. Quintain? Yep, that's that thing the knights used to practice on with their lances. Q? No. Nulliparous? Yeah, female with no offspring. And looked? No. Okay, now you've never seen these words, but when I do this all around the world, people are almost always able to tell the difference. And why is that? They've never seen these word forms before. It's because they have intuitions of spelling from exposure, not from explicit teaching. So the point is, you've got good exposure, you probably had good intuitions, and a lot of that comes from exposure. So it's not just explicit teaching. Okay, so explicit teaching and exposure support each other in complementary ways, and we need both of those in order to learn vocabulary well. It's not that one is better than the other. They do different things and they work in combinations. We really need both. Okay, so one of the last points is vocabulary is more than just single words. Again, this is something that is becoming a lot better known. There's lots of phrasal vocabulary, hundreds of thousands, and no one can count them all. So there might be as many phrases as there are single words. And why is that? Because they're useful for language use. So formulaic sequences, so that's what I'll call them, formulaic sequences. So we use them for a lot of like just everyday functions, making a polite request. Would you please open the window? Would you mind closing the door? We use them for personal interaction. So just daily chat I talked about. So a lot of it's kind of stuff that we're not really trying to give information. We're just really having a chat. It's fun. It's just social. So we talk about things like nice weather today, or did you really? How interesting. So these are the kind of things we use again and again, and they don't really have a lot of meaning. It's sort of the grease that you use for social interaction. We just say them and we're not really that worried about it. but a lot of them are formulaic sequences. Discourse organization, you've seen these as, if you're an EAP teacher, in conclusion, in other words, as I was saying, you know, they happen again and again. They have their meanings. They're phrases, they're formulaic sequences. Even like technical phrases. So blood pressure is 140/70 or whatever it is. It's always in that order. Or if you're a pilot like I am, the phrase clear to land. I need to listen to that phrase in order to get permission to land the airplane in the airport. Okay, so these are all phrases. Okay, so phrasal vocabulary, formulaic sequences, we're going to have to focus on them as well as single words. And I think, you know, explicitly exposure. So the most frequent usable phrases are probably worth teaching explicitly, but probably most of them are going to have to be learned from massive exposure because, you know, we just can't teach all the vocabulary explicit. We need that extensive exposure in addition. Okay, so how do we teach all these words? Well, that's a big challenge. We need a large vocabulary. So one way that we might think about it, so this comes from Paul Nation, and he's thinking that, okay, whoops, wrong direction. So that there's 4 strands. Okay, so if we look up here in the top right corner, language focus, language learning. So that's explicit teaching, and that's the kind of thing we think about. Yep, and that's important. And he'd say, well, maybe, you know, maybe 25%. You're going like, well, why only 25%? Because he's saying that we need to have other things in our curriculum as well. So meaning focused input. So this is lots of reading and lots of listening. And what I was talking about is you need massive exposure, right? And he's saying like, it's just as important as the explicit teaching. That exposure, that input is just as important as the explicit teaching. But if we want our students to be productive, then we have to have meaning focused output as well. We have to have our students speaking. We have to have our students writing. And he's saying, well, if we want our students to be well-rounded and productive, that should be 25% as well. And this last part here is something that a lot of us never think about very much, fluency development. So remember when I showed you about that mastery going from like, you know, 0 to 100%? Well, a lot of that mastery is not just what you know, but how well and how quickly you can do it. So, you know, I've had a lot of students who, you know, maybe knew these vocabulary words. Maybe when I was teaching in Japan, teaching beginners, they knew a lot of the words, but they couldn't read them very quickly. So that means, you know, they couldn't use them because it was just too slow. Or in speaking, if I gave them 10 minutes, they could make a beautiful sentence. But in everyday conversation, they just couldn't access the words quickly enough in order to use them. So fluency development is part of this increasing mastery that's important. So you might think about this fluency development not only just in terms of like speed, but just that improving the knowledge about vocabulary, what you know about it, and, you know, rounding that out. And so he's saying, you know, what we need to do is not forget any of these. He's saying maybe give 25% to each strand, you know, and you can change it around. But the point is we need to have all of these. It's not just explicit teaching. We need to focus on the input, the output, and the vocabulary development, the fluency development as well. Okay, so that brings me to the end of the session. So I've got a little funny thing here. Here's my master. May the lexicon be with you. And the last slide is here. So if you look at the top picture here, hopefully that reminds you of a phrase, see you later, alligator, which is an old phrase, you never see it anymore, but I think it's kind of funny. So there I am. There's a web address. So if you're interested in vocabulary and the kind of things I've been talking about, I've been doing research on this for 25 years. And so what I've done on my personal website, I put all this research. So if you're interested in research articles, I've got almost all my research articles up there for free. So you can just download them for free. www.norbertschmitt.co.uk. There's vocabulary resources on there as well, word lists, tests. So there's just a wide range of resources if you're interested in vocabulary, either for teaching pedagogy or if you're interested on the research side. There's a lot to, you know, there's a lot on there. It's all freely available. I worked hard to, put it together. So please use it. Please tell your friends about it. And, it's there for your use. And hopefully that will help you to, improve your knowledge about vocabulary and give you some ideas about teaching. I can't tell you how to teach in your particular situation. You're the expert there, but hopefully it can give you some background knowledge that'll help you think more clearly about what you want to do about vocabulary in your own teaching. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. I guess we're going over to Suhad now, and I'll take questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Norbert, for an excellent presentation as usual. Very interesting, very informative. Everybody's thanking you in the chat area, by the way. We do have some questions, so if you allow me, I'm going to take some of them because we have like 10-15 minutes before the first paper presentation.
Okay.
So we are going to take some of those questions. The first one is from Abdul Wahid. He's asking about the figures that you gave in the beginning. Remember when in the beginning when you gave figures about English used in academia, in publishing, in Twitter?
Yes.
So he's asking about the source of these figures.
Okay, there's a range of sources. So most of the, I just did research on the internet, and a lot of the figures came from like, either publishing houses or institutions, or like the cinema stuff came from a website that like tabulates the, the viewing habits in different parts of the world. So they all came from different sources. A lot of them, the most recent figures were only like, from 2013 or 2015. So a lot of them didn't have real recent figures. So yeah, all I can say is it's a range of sources. I actually did that research for a book I'm writing for the general population called Language Power. I'm hoping to publish that in the next year or so. So when I do, that will have a little bit more information about where the sources of those came from.
Thank you, Norbert. Okay, so the other question is from Sumaya. She's asking about the research, the one with Gardner and Davis and Diane.
Yeah.
Is it only from the COCA, from an American corpus, or is it also related to the BNC, the figures?
Okay, so those figures came from the COCA corpus. So this is research that's been going on for a long time. We started this probably about 5 years ago. And we started doing it. And so it was a COCA corpus at the time. And so, yeah, so it was based on the COCA corpus. But we just all have got busy, and, it's just like, it's one of those projects that we haven't, other things have taken over. So it's just been sort of laying on the side. Unfortunately, Dee Gardner has died in the meantime, and that sort of like slowed things down. I've retired, Mark Davies is retired, Diane is retired. So it's one of those things I quite like to publish. I think it's, it's important research, but we're all just taking a break. So it's something that we might take up, in the next year, and we'll probably redo the figures because the COCA is larger now. And yeah, so keep your eye out. It might be out in a year or two. We'll see.
Thank you. Okay, so the other question is, this is Intisar. She's saying, thanks for the informative presentation. Do these figures apply for any additional second language, or is it particular to English language? I think she's talking about the figures for coverage, 95, 98%. Yeah,
that's a really interesting question. And the answer is I don't know. But I can make a guess. Well, the answer is those figures are for English. Now, the question is, will they apply to other languages? And I think probably for other languages, you'll get better coverage with lower vocabulary sizes. So the problem with English is, it's taken words from every language in the world. So we've got like, okay, let's say, you're talking about a king. So you could use king, which is the old, Germanic word, the Anglo-Saxon word, or you could use royal, which is like French, or you could use regal, so you got like words, 3 words that more or less mean the same kind of thing, referring to a king, but, they don't have the same spelling. They're not connected to each other. So, for this one idea, you got 3 words in English, whereas in another language, you might just have 1 word. In German, for example, you can just put lots of words together into big compound words. So you might know, 5 smaller words, but they might all be put together in one big long word. And even though you never seen that word before, you can understand it because you know all the small words that it's made up of. English tends not to work like that so much. So I think to answer the question is that these figures that we have for English, those are what we have, but probably for other languages, you probably get higher coverage for lower vocabulary sizes. But I don't, I can't give you figures. I don't know exactly, that'd be really interesting research. For example, in Arabic, what kind of coverage do you get for different vocabulary sizes? Because, the language is set up in a different way. So I guess that's about all I can say about that.
Thank you so much. Okay. So another question that we have here is about the role. This is Dr. Muhammad Shahid Kamal. He's asking, what is the role of mood in comprehension? Like mood of how are you using the language? Is it listening? Is it viewing? Is it reading? This is
So how does the mode affect?
Yeah, I think he's saying mood. I'm not sure if he's talking about the mood of MOOD. So I'm not sure if he's talking about your mood, how you are feeling about the reading when you are reading and how that affects comprehension. I think this is what he's talking about, like the effect factor.
Well, I suppose that's probably a question that would be good for my colleague Zoltan Dornier, who's interested in motivation. So we know that, people are people, we're not robots. And sometimes we feel great, sometimes we have lots of energy, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we're motivated, sometimes we're not. Clearly, those personal factors make a really big difference in learning a language. Motivation is one of the key things that we have to, work on as teachers, motivating our students. So clearly it's really important. That's not my specialist area. I mean, I know that, it is important. So I think the one thing I will say is that, vocabulary is a long-term learning process. We have to know a lot of words and we have to know a lot about a word. So we need to know a lot of different words, but all those words take time to learn. All that together means that vocabulary learning, if you want to reach a high level, takes a long time. It's not like over weeks or months. We're talking over years. And how do you keep yourself motivated? How do you keep yourself interested to keep learning? Because, language learning is work. And for some people it's hard work, other people it's easier, but it is still work. You have to put effort into it. How do you keep yourself motivated? How do you keep yourself interested to learn a second language over a long, long time? So, vocabulary learning requires motivation. You have to be in a good mood about it. And I suppose that means you have to feel like you're making progress. You have to feel like you're getting some benefits, which means that, I think you need to get your vocabulary size really pushed up toward the beginning so that students can think that like, oh, now I can understand something. It's not perfect, but I can understand something. I can say some simple ideas. I think that's really motivating, so how do we get people to where they can start using language quickly, at least in simpler ways? Well, vocabulary learning at the beginning is one way we can do that.
Okay, thanks. Another question we have here is from Safa Abdel Halim. She's asking, is there a specific number of vocabulary that can be taught per class?
Yeah, this is one of the big questions. And the answer is, who knows, my view is that in general, we don't teach enough vocabulary. Okay. Now, let's put it this way. How much vocabulary can we introduce in classes? There's no way that people are going to learn those words because like I said before, vocabulary is not known or unknown. But what we can do is introduce a lot of vocabulary and start the learning process. So I don't think it's, too much, introduce 10 new words a lesson or something. Or, even 20 new words a lesson. the point is, we can't expect students to really know them perfectly, but what we can do is, I'm a big fan of word lists. For some people, word lists have, a really bad connotation, a really bad feeling. Because why? Because what happens, you give a word list for homework, you give a quiz the next day, and then you never use those words again. So what do the students do? They know it's just a game. They'll study on the bus on the way to class, they'll take the test, and they'll forget about it because I've got to just memorize 10 new words for tomorrow. That's not the right way to use word lists. So yes, give a word list for homework, because that's the kind of thing that students, that's the kind of learning that students can do on their own time. They probably should do that on their own time as homework. And then, okay, yes, give the quiz if you have to. The thing is, you should, those 10 words that you've given for homework should actually be used in the lesson. They should be drawn from the readings you're going to use. They're going to be used in your exercises. If students start seeing that, okay, I've been giving words for homework, but they're actually going to be used in the class. They're going to be useful. I need to know them if I want to, be able to do the exercises. Then those words become meaningful. And it's not just to take a stupid quiz that you're just going to forget. No, you're going to need them. And, not only, and then when you give that quiz, don't give the quiz just for the 10 words, have it be a 15-word quiz with 5 from previous weeks. So the students know that it's like, they have to be responsible for these words, not just that they, learn today, in the morning, take the quiz and then forget in the afternoon. It's just, no, they're going to be constantly, held responsible for those words, not just on quizzes, but they're going to be held responsible because these words are, made into the curriculum in a way that they come up again and again. So I don't think students have a problem with learning and memorizing vocabulary if they see that they're valuable and they're going to be used. But students really, really don't like busy work. They don't like memorizing anything if it's just to take a quiz and then they're not going to be any use. So I think what we need to do is, build our curriculum, decide what we're going to teach, what readings we're going to have, what exercises, and then take the vocabulary from them. And that's what should be given for homework. But that means, you got to do it in advance. You got to know what you're teaching tomorrow in order to give the vocabulary for tonight. So, syllabuses need to be organized, and the vocabulary needs to be not just something that's added on completely separate and isolated, but the vocabulary learning needs to be part of the syllabus and really that drives the whole learning. And if you do it that way, then I think students will, come on board and, they'll play along with you. So how many words can you teach? 10 or 20 a week. But make sure that your students, are using them in class in the exercises. You have to give a grammar examples, don't you? Well, use that vocabulary from the word list in your grammar examples. There's just so many ways to use the vocabulary. Make sure that your students have lots of, extensive reading and, listening, but make sure that those words, the readings you give them are recycling the words that, they've learned on the word list. So the students see them again and again and start becoming familiar with them. So that's the way. How many words can you teach? We don't really know if there's a maximum, but I think we need to make sure there's a lot more than before, because if we're going to get these vocabulary sizes I'm talking about, students need to learn 10 or 20 Students need to start the learning process for 10 or 20 new words in every lesson. Otherwise, we're never going to reach those vocabulary sizes. But that means we have to keep after it and make sure those words occur again and again in the exercises and the exposure that students are getting outside of class.
Thank you so much, Norbert. Maybe just one more question because we need to move on to other rooms.
Okay.
Again, Dr. Safa is asking about the role of strategies, vocabulary learning strategies. You talked about explicit teaching and implicit learning, but she's asking what is the role of strategies, vocabulary learning strategies?
Okay, well, strategies basically are what the students, strategies are self-control, aren't they? They're self-regulation. So as teachers, we can guide which vocabulary students learn or start the learning process on. So strategies can be really useful for like an individualized, customized way of approaching vocabulary. And I think what students have to do is find which approaches work for them. So some students are really good at like explicit learning where, you know, they memorize word lists and then they really look for those words in outside readings. Other people, you know, much prefer just, I want to read a lot and then the words will just come up. Some students like dictionaries. Well, most students like dictionaries. You know, some, you know, students like, you know, mnemonics where they like make images or word games in their head to remember the words. Basically, you know, I think that strategies are good if students, well, students need to be self-regulated. Students need to understand, okay, what strategies are there? Which ones work best for me? So what doesn't work if we teach strategies like, okay, everybody do this. You know, everyone's different. So I think we can teach strategies and then see, you know, let students feel and try them out and see which ones work for them, which combinations work for them, which strategies work the best in which situations. So learner strategies are great, but it has to be like with self-awareness. The students are not just learning a strategy and using that because the teacher said to use it, but using it because I found that it works for me. In this situation, this strategy works best, so that's why I'm going to use it. In another situation, maybe another strategy works best, so I'll use that one. So students need to have control of the strategies and be able to shift and move and use the strategies that works for that word in that situation, that context, that works the best for them. So strategies are good, but they need to be customized for the individual student.
Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, we have a lot more questions in the QA area, but unfortunately, we have to finish. By the way, before we finish, I just wanted to let you know that in the QA area, Faisal Hamoud was thanking you and welcoming you as well. He's one of your former PhD students as well. He's happy to have you here with us. Unfortunately, I don't have time to ask other questions. Actually, we cannot say goodbye, but we have to. Thank you so much, Norbert, for your efforts. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation. I know that you had an eye surgery, but you made it today. So thank you so much for your efforts. Everybody's thanking you here, and we hope we will be able to see you soon, maybe in another presentation here.
Yep. Well, I'm looking forward to coming when the COVID is, you know, defeated around the world, and you know, it'll be really nice to be able to travel and see people face to face, because I really prefer being able to talk to people face to face, and you know, that's the way I like to communicate. But thank God for video, because it's allowed us to have a good conference. So I hope everybody's learned something. You know, I can't tell you how to teach, but I've helped you, if I've helped you to think about your own teaching and how you might approach it, then hopefully it's been a successful presentation. And yep, so
thank you.
Have a great conference, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Norbert. See you later.
Okay, see you later. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks to everyone. So here we come to the end of our presentation with Norbert. Now we can go to the other rooms for the other sessions. Thank you so much.